I'm here today with Robert Kennedy Jr., who is a well-known environmentalist, with Clara Bingham, who is the producer of the film The Last Mountain, and with Bill Haney, who's the director of the film The Last Mountain. Let me begin with you, Bobby. Tell me, why do you think mountaintop mining and mountaintop removal is something that people need to know about?
Well, it affects all Americans, and it's a very, very destructive form of mining that we don't need in our country. It's destructive of jobs, it's destructive of prosperity, and we're destroying an entire mountain range. In the last 10 years, we've destroyed a section of the Appalachians, 1.4 million acres, on an area that's larger than the state of Delaware. We've blown up 500 of the biggest mountains in West Virginia. We're detonating, we've filled with the rubble 2,200 miles of America's rivers and streams. And every week, these mining companies that do mountaintop removal, mainly Massey coal, detonates an amount of ammonia nitrate explosives in the Appalachian larger than the Hiroshima bomb. So if you did this in the Berkshires, the Catskills, or in Utah or Colorado, you'd go to jail. But in West Virginia, because democracy has been so badly subverted in that state, this kind of practice is allowed to continue. It's illegal. In fact, last year I debated Don Blankenship on television, who's the CEO of Massey Coal, and I asked him, you had 67,000 violations of the Clean Water Act over 5 years, and a number of other statutes, the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, the mining laws, the labor laws. And I said, is it possible to do mountaintop removal without violating the law? And he said, no, it isn't. So these are essentially criminal enterprises. They have to break the law in order to compete in the marketplace. And they're delivering a product that is heavily subsidized. I believe in free market capitalism. We shouldn't be giving these subsidies to a dirty, filthy industry that's destroying jobs, and that's destroying people's lives, and that's destroying the economy of the state of West Virginia.
Clara, you were involved in this from the beginning in the making of the film. How did you get involved in the film, and why did you decide that it was something that you felt was important to do?
Well, Chris, I went down to West Virginia and Eastern Kentucky as a journalist writing a profile for a magazine about a man named Jack Spadaro, who at the time had become an Appalachian folk hero. He worked for the Mine Safety Health Administration since the Nixon administration and quit and became a whistleblower during the Bush administration because an investigation that he was conducting about a very massive coal sludge spill in Inez, Kentucky, had been cut short by the Bush administration on the day of the inauguration in January of 2001. And he blew the whistle, was fired, and then later became a prominent spokesman against mountaintop removal mining. And I went down there to write a profile about him, and he took me all over Eastern Kentucky, where I had spent time. I'm a native of Kentucky and was born there and spent a lot of time in my teenage years as a young reporter in Eastern Kentucky. And I'd seen strip mining back in the 70s and early 80s, but this was an entirely new scale of destruction. And I became radicalized by it. I realized that Appalachia was basically going. It was going to die. People were very sick. The entire mountain range, all that was being destroyed. 500 mountains have been knocked down so far, and there are ghost towns everywhere. And I just felt a very strong bond and connection to the region, and realized that the only way to really tell the story with impact was visually, which is why I enlisted Bill, and Bill and I teamed up with Bobby, and Bill's an environmentalist as well as a really talented filmmaker.
Bill, tell me, what did you hope to accomplish by directing this film?
Well, I think first it's to tell the inspiring and dramatically engaging story of the community at the center of our film. What Bobby and Clara say is true, which is that there's kind of continent scale environmental devastation taking place, and it has horrific consequences. But a lot of what's moving for me as a storyteller is this extraordinary community at the heart of the film. This folks, a waitress and former Marines and college students from around the country and academics and 92-year-old grandmothers who have been radicalized like Clara and who have
What impact has this had on their lives?
They have seen the mountain ranges they roamed as children be devastated, the water that they drink or that their children drink be devastated, the towns they grew up in or went to church in have been bought and obliterated. They feel that in every way, shape, or form, the quality of life that they grew up with has been stolen from them. And when they began to protest, initially kind of peacefully and quietly, please ask my congressman to see if I get some help. And when they were turned down time and time again, ultimately to the governor's office, they began a kind of marching process that in many ways feels like the beginning of the civil rights movement. And there are now 2,500 of them who have been arrested. There have been acts of civil disobedience, peaceful civil disobedience throughout the area. And when I started to see footage of 92-year-old grandmothers being taken out of the governor's office in their wheelchair in chains because they were asking for fresh drinking water, it was really clear that this was a story about this particular area and these practices, but it was also a prototypical American story about what really got us a country. It felt like the farmers in Concord or the people on the bridge in Selma who really decided they weren't going to take it and were going to stand up. And they inspired me, and I think Clara and Bobby. And so I was drawn to telling their story.
Bobby, coal, I know despite the devastation of this kind of practice, coal is an important source of energy domestically in America. I think it's responsible for maybe half of the electric production in the country. How do you, is there a way to extract this coal in such a way that it doesn't produce this kind of environmental devastation?
Well, the traditional way of extracting coal was through digging tunnels in the ground. I remember my father in the 60s having a conversation with me about strip mining, and the strips at that point were very small compared to what they are today. But he was fighting it in the Senate. He said, he spent a lot of time in West Virginia and Kentucky, as much of our family did. And he said, they're not just destroying the environment, they're permanently impoverishing these communities because there's no way that they can regenerate an economy from these barren moonscapes that are left behind. And he said they're doing it so they can break the unions, which is exactly what happened. When he told me that, there were 151,000 unionized mine workers in West Virginia digging coal out of tunnels in the ground. So that provides a lot of jobs. The strip industry is designed to eliminate jobs ruthlessly and mercilessly, to substitute big machines and lots of explosives for human beings. So now there are fewer than 15,000 miners left in the state. Fewer than half of them are unionized, but they're taking more coal out of West Virginia than they were in 1968. The only difference is all the money goes up to Wall Street, to out-of-state corporations which own 95% of the coal, and to the big banking houses that finance these operations. You ask me whether there's an alternative? Absolutely. And I build wind farms and solar farms, and right now I'm involved with a company that's building one of the largest power plants in America, and it's solar. And it's in the Mojave Desert. The company's called Bright Source. The plant is 2.7 gigawatts of power. A typical nuke plant is 1 gigawatt. We're building it in 3 years. It takes 10 years to build a coal plant. It takes 30 years to build a nuke plant, and we're building it at 1/5 the cost it would take to build a nuke plant, about $3 billion a gigawatt, which is the same as it costs for coal. But once you build this plant, a solar plant, it's free energy forever because the photons are hitting the earth every day for free. And it's clean energy, and it's patriotic, and it's coming from this country, and it's not bankrupting us or getting us in foreign wars. Once you build that $3 billion coal plant, now you've got to go to West Virginia, cut down the mountains, ship them across the country in rail yards, burn the coal, poison with mercury every freshwater fish in America, according to CDC, kill 60,000 Americans every year from breathing ozone and particulates from coal plants, according to EPA. 10 million asthma attacks, 1 million lost work days. The acid rain, which has sterilized 1/5 of the lakes in the Appalachians and destroyed the forest cover on the high peaks from Georgia to northern Quebec. And then, of course, devastating one of the heartlands of American culture, which is the Appalachian Mountains, where bluegrass music came from, and NASCAR racing, and so much of these historic landscapes where Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett roamed, the richest ecologically landscapes in North America, and we're devastating them. There's lots of good alternatives.
Bill, my understanding is that the coal companies claim that they reclaim these mountains and that they refill behind them once they've extracted the coal. Is that legitimate?
They don't reclaim them in a way that a 3-year-old would consider to be appropriate. They have manipulated the political and regulatory process to make it at times legally acceptable. So they have to replace mountains. They have to take a mountain that might look like this to begin with, and it looks like this at the end, but they've gotten the state to call that the approximate original contour, so it looks the same. You wouldn't think so, but by state regulatory interpretation it does. They're supposed to put the topsoil back so that you can grow the flora and fauna that customarily were part of an Appalachian forest. They've gotten the state rules to be changed so that they can put rock instead and call rock a soil substitute. Now, all of us who are gardeners know rock isn't a very good soil substitute, but that's what they call it. Instead of the 2,000 miles of rivers and stream, which we know if you tried to fill in 2,000 miles of the Potomac, there'd be uprising right before they put you in jail.
200 feet.
200 feet. They've been able to get rid of them by creating what they call stream substitutes, which are basically bedrock with rocks next to it.
Plumbing.
So it's a complete
fixtures.
and utter fiction designed to convince the public. And you can see that they don't believe in it themselves because it's like a Potemkin system. If you drive the highways and byways of Appalachia, what you see is trees because they plant like a 100-foot strip, like a Potemkin village, so you can't see the devastation behind. But if you fly over in a helicopter, as we did for much of this film, and you see miles and miles and miles of obliterated landscape, you quickly realize that something deeply wrong is happening, and that our patrimony, both our patrimony in terms of our democracy and this ecological patrimony that we inherited from our great-grandparents, is being dropped in a meat grinder to spit out bonuses for a small number of coal executives.
Clara, is there one personal story that struck you the hardest when you were there?
I love Maria Ganot's story because she's a ordinary person who has done extraordinary things, and we have many people like her in the
What
movie.
happened to her?
Well, she she's actually part Cherokee, and her family came to West Virginia during the Trail of Tears and settled there and have a homestead in Bob White in this beautiful green lush valley. And a few years ago there was a big
She's a
rainstorm.
coal miner's family.
She's a gold miner's daughter, granddaughter, sister, and is a waitress and mother of 2, and living on her family homestead. And it was flooded severely one day because of the mountaintop removal mine that was just above her house, and it had defoliated the valley, and her house was almost swept away in the flood. And she woke up and realized that she had to devote her life to fighting mountaintop removal, and she has become one of the most powerful voices in West Virginia for this movement and against mountaintop removal mining. She won the Goldman Prize.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Bobby and Bill Haney and Clara, for coming in today. It's very interesting, and I'm sure our viewers will want to see it as soon as possible.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.